Russian jets invade NATO, and the worst might be about to happen. 3 Russian MiG-31K fighter jets invaded the airspace of a NATO country, and this just triggered the most dangerous moment in the world since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. An open clash between NATO, with the United States as its main member, and Russia could be imminent. This wasn't just some accidental violation. It was a calculated provocation that made NATO invoke Article 4, putting the whole Western military alliance on maximum alert. What happened in the skies over Estonia, the invaded member country, may have forever shifted the geopolitical balance of Eastern Europe. And today, we're going to break down why. On that fateful Friday morning, NATO radars picked up something disturbing. 3 powerful MiG-31K interceptor jets from the Russian Air Force were moving dangerously close to Estonia's air border. These weren't just any planes. The MiG-31K is one of the most advanced aircraft in Russia's arsenal, capable of carrying Kinzhal hypersonic missiles. What should have been a respectful approach to international borders turned into a direct and prolonged violation. The 3 Russian jets not only crossed into Estonian airspace over the strategic Gulf of Finland, but stayed there for a full 12 minutes, flying about 5 nautical miles inside the sovereign territory of a NATO member. During those critical minutes, the Russian pilots totally ignored all warning signals transmitted by NATO forces. They didn't respond to radio comms. They didn't change course. It was like they were sending a crystal-clear message: we don't recognize your borders. NATO's response was immediate and decisive. Italian F-35s, part of the Baltic air policing mission, scrambled to intercept the intruders. Swedish and Finnish aircraft also joined the intercept, creating a real air barrier against the Russian jets. When faced with hard evidence of the airspace violation, the Kremlin went with a familiar playbook: flat-out denial. The Russian Defense Ministry issued a categorical statement denying any breach of Estonian airspace. According to Moscow's official version, the 3 MiG-31s were just on a scheduled flight from Karelia, near the Finnish border, to Russia's Kaliningrad exclave, a strategic military territory boxed in by Lithuania and Poland. The Russians claimed their aircraft only flew over neutral waters in the Baltic Sea, strictly following international rules. The flight took place in strict compliance with international regulations and did not violate the state borders of other countries, said the Russian Defense Ministry spokesman. That statement came with an accusation against the West, calling Estonia's claims nothing but Russophobic hysteria. But the international community didn't buy it. Estonian authorities strongly rejected Moscow's narrative, presenting radar data and evidence from multiple sources that clearly confirmed the violation. Military aviation experts pointed out that the route Russia claimed didn't justify those jets being inside Estonian airspace. The breach of Estonian airspace triggered an unprecedented NATO reaction. Estonian Prime Minister Kristen Michal made a historic decision to invoke Article 4 of the North Atlantic Treaty, a rarely used mechanism that allows formal consultations between all 32 alliance members whenever any of them feels threatened. This violation is totally unacceptable, Michal declared in a dramatic post on X. The government of Estonia has decided to request NATO Article 4 consultations to discuss response options with our allies. Article 4 isn't the same as the famous Article 5, which would force a collective military response, but it's still a major step up in escalation. Once triggered, it requires all NATO members to formally gather, assess the threat, and coordinate a joint response. This was only the 8th time in NATO history that Article 4 was invoked, and the very first time specifically tied to Estonia. Emergency meetings started right away, with reps from all member states reviewing not just this single incident, but a growing pattern of Russian provocations across the Baltic region. The United States, as NATO's leader, put out a firm statement via the State Department, vowing to defend every inch of NATO territory and calling Russia's actions extremely provocative and destabilizing. This incident didn't happen in a vacuum. International security analysts flagged a troubling pattern of Russian provocations ramping up in recent weeks. Just a few days before the Estonian airspace violation, around 20 Russian drones were spotted flying over NATO countries in the region. Poland, 2 weeks earlier, had also invoked Article 4 after incidents with Russian drones crossing its airspace. This pattern suggests a coordinated Kremlin strategy to test NATO's reactions and cohesion. Geopolitical experts believe Russia has 2 main goals with these airspace incursions. First, to test NATO's response times and defense capabilities. Second, to stir up psychological and political tension among member states, especially those geographically closer to Russia. Estonian Foreign Minister Margus Tsahkna didn't downplay the gravity of it when speaking to the press. "We're dealing with a systematic pattern of provocations aimed at destabilizing the entire Baltic region," he said. And it wasn't just NATO responding. The European Union also came out strong, with its High Representative for Foreign Policy calling the Russian incursion an extremely dangerous provocation. That official EU wording matters, since it paves the way for new economic sanctions against Russia. Portugal, as a member of both NATO and the EU, issued a strong condemnation of the airspace violation. This is the third Russian provocation in EU airspace in just a few days, the Portuguese government declared, showing full solidarity with Estonia. The coordination between NATO and the EU shows how seriously the West is treating these Russian provocations. European diplomatic sources say a new sanctions package is already being prepared, this time targeting Russia's military aerospace sector. To fully understand how serious this incident is, you need to grasp the strategic importance of Russia's Kaliningrad exclave. This small region, about the size of Connecticut, is completely cut off from mainland Russia and surrounded by NATO countries, Lithuania and Poland. Kaliningrad works as a real Russian military fortress right in the heart of Europe. That's where Russia keeps its Iskander ballistic missiles, capable of hitting targets all over the Baltic region, plus a major chunk of its Baltic Sea Fleet. The route Russia claimed, from Karelia to Kaliningrad, is one of the most sensitive in Europe when it comes to security. Any Russian military movement that way is closely monitored by NATO, and airspace violations in that corridor are considered especially provocative. Military experts argue that the MiG-31KS that breached Estonian airspace were probably being relocated to Kaliningrad as part of a military buildup in the region. If that's true, it would mark a serious escalation in Russia's Baltic military posture. This incident goes way beyond just an air border violation. It's a direct test of NATO's resolve and of the European security system set up after World War II. Choosing Estonia as the target wasn't random. As one of the 3 Baltic states that gained independence after the Soviet Union collapsed, Estonia has always had a tense relationship with Russia. About 25% of Estonia's population is ethnically Russian, which creates a potential vulnerability the Kremlin might try to exploit. National security analysts warn these air provocations could just be the start of a bigger destabilization campaign. Russia's playbook includes gray zone tactics, actions that stay below the threshold of outright war, but constantly test defenses and adversary cohesion. NATO's coordinated response to this incident will be key in deciding whether Russia keeps up or even escalates these provocations. A weak response could embolden bolder moves, while an overly aggressive response could risk dangerous escalation. But while diplomats are working behind the scenes to contain things, European militaries are bracing for darker scenarios. Leaked documents from Germany's defense ministry revealed contingency plans estimating up to 1,000 casualties per day if a direct NATO-Russia conflict broke out. These plans, while theoretical preparedness drills, show that European military authorities take the possibility of a larger war very seriously. Germany, as Europe's biggest economy and a core NATO member, is coordinating with allies to ensure proper medical and logistical capacity. The Baltic states, given how close they sit to Russia, are especially focused on beefing up their air defenses. American Patriot missile systems have been deployed in the region, and NATO joint military drills have ramped up in both frequency and scale. America's response to this incident has been carefully calibrated, showing strength without sparking unnecessary escalation. The U.S. State Department reaffirmed the American commitment to NATO's collective defense, but avoided fiery rhetoric that could come off as provocative. Pentagon sources said U.S. forces in Europe were put on heightened readiness, though not mobilized for specific actions. This shows Washington is serious, but without crossing red lines that might trigger a Russian military response. Meanwhile, alongside the Estonia incident, Washington-Moscow tensions hit a new level when President Trump announced the deployment of 2 nuclear submarines to appropriate regions after threats from former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. This was one of the most explicit nuclear muscle flexes in years, signaling that the U.S. is ready to counter any escalation with devastating strategic capabilities. America's Ohio-class subs are among the deadliest weapons on Earth, each able to carry up to 24 Trident II ballistic missiles, with multiple thermonuclear warheads reaching up to 4,600 miles away. Just mentioning the deployment of these strategic weapons shows how seriously Washington is taking Russia's provocations. The U.S. administration is also working with European allies to make sure any response is multilateral and proportional. The goal is to show NATO unity while keeping diplomatic channels open to de-escalate, even as America shows it's ready with nuclear deterrence. The Russian jets incident over Estonia marks a turning point in relations between Russia and the West. The coming weeks will be crucial to see whether this was just a one-off provocation or the beginning of a new phase of confrontation. Three main scenarios emerge from this crisis. In the first, more optimistic one, diplomatic channels succeed in containing escalation and setting up new protocols to prevent similar incidents. In the second, Russian provocations keep happening at a low level, creating a new normal of constant tension in the Baltic. The third, most worrying scenario is a gradual escalation leading to direct clashes between NATO and Russian forces. Neither side wants full-scale war, but the dynamics of international crises can create situations where accidental escalations become unavoidable. What happened in Estonia's skies that Friday in September wasn't just an airspace violation. It was a moment that may have fundamentally redefined Europe's security relations for decades to come. Estonia's invoking of NATO's Article 4 sets a new precedent for how the alliance reacts to Russian provocations. The fast and decisive coordination among member states showed that, despite occasional internal tensions, NATO stays solid when facing external threats. For Russia, this incident is both a tactical win and a possible strategic mistake. While it showed off its ability to provoke and test Western defenses, it also strengthened NATO's unity and may have sped up the development of new defensive capabilities in the Baltic region. The world now watches how this crisis plays out, knowing the decisions made in the coming weeks could decide whether we enter a new era of constant tension or manage to find a path to lasting stability. One thing's for sure, the sky over the Baltic will never be the same. And all of us are living with the consequences of this new geopolitical reality born in those tense 12 minutes over Estonia. The lingering question is, was this just the beginning?